Poor twin girls give a sandwich to a billionaire disguised as a homeless man. It's all we have, but you seem hungrier than us. Days later, third black SUVs stop in front of their door. The makeshift canvas roof swayed in the cold morning wind. Dew dripped through the gaps in the wooden beams, forming small puddles on the hard-packed dirt floor. The sound of the dripping water set a familiar rhythm for those who lived there. Drip, 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 an early morning lament. Mira woke up first. Her large brown eyes, too big for her thin face, observed the improvised ceiling while her ears picked up the usual morning sounds. Next to her, curled up under the only thin blanket, Tess was still asleep. They shared the same old mattress placed directly on the ground. "Tess," Mira whispered, nudging her twin sister, "wake up. Dad's already gone." Tess opened her eyes, identical to her sister's, and stretched like a kitten. The two were 5 years old and shared not only their looks but every moment of their short lives, both the good and the bad. "I'm hungry," Tess mumbled, rubbing her skinny belly under the faded t-shirt she used as pajamas. "I know. Let's see if there's anything to eat." The girls stood and walked across the single room they called home. It was a 10 by 12-foot shack built from discarded wooden boards salvaged from dumpsters, topped with a faded blue tarp. On the sturdiest wall, made of aligned planks, there was a magazine cutout of a dark-haired woman smiling kindly. It was protected by a piece of clear plastic, taped in place with worn-out adhesive, a picture of the mother who was no longer with them. Every morning, Mira stopped in front of the photo just as she was doing now. "Good morning, Mum," she said softly, touching the plastic with her fingertips. Tess came closer and repeated the gesture, a silent sign of respect. "Do you think she's hungry up in heaven?" Tess asked. "Dad says no one gets hungry in heaven." Their shack stood at the far edge of a vacant lot, hidden among tall trees and overgrown weeds. In the distance, modern buildings formed a city that seemed to exist on another planet, a place where people had real homes with waterproof roofs and fully stocked refrigerators. Ray, the girl's father, had left before sunrise. Each day he roamed the streets with a small wooden cart, collecting broken items people threw away, old radios, toys, fans, anything his skillful hands could fix. On the shack's only shelf, just a plank propped on bricks, the girls found half a piece of stale bread and a plastic bottle of water. "Dad left a note," Mira said, pointing to a small scrap of paper beside the bread. Neither of them could read, but they recognized the drawing, a heart with 3 people holding hands inside it. It was Ray's way of saying he'd be back soon, that he was thinking of them, that he loved them. The twins shared the bread equally, saving a piece for their dad. Breakfast lasted less than a minute, but they savored every crumb. After eating, they tidied the small space, folding the blanket, straightening their few utensils, and sweeping the floor with a broom made of tied-together twigs. There was no running water or electricity. To relieve themselves, they used a bucket behind a piece of hanging cloth that served as a divider. Every night, Ray would carry the waste to dump into a distant storm drain. While cleaning, Tess paused in front of a cardboard box that held their few treasures. 3 dolls with missing arms or legs, colorful bottle caps, some shiny pebbles they'd found outside, and a bird feather. "Want to play outside?" she suggested. The area in front of the shack was the only playground they knew. There, in the patch of weeds Ray kept trimmed, they created entire worlds, using stones as imaginary furniture and sticks as pretend family members in a happy household. By the time the sun was high, Ray returned, pushing his empty cart. His face showed the weariness of someone who had walked miles without any luck. "Dad!" The girls ran to him, hugging his legs, which were dusty from the road. "My princesses," he smiled, kneeling down to embrace them properly. Ray was 32, but looked far older. His calloused hands and sun-worn face told the story of a hard life. Since Sarah, his wife, had died from an untreated pneumonia, he'd been raising the twins alone, without assistance or proper documentation. "Didn't find anything decent today," he explained, sitting on the lone wooden stool. "But tomorrow will be better." "We saved some bread for you," Mira said proudly, bringing the piece wrapped in paper. Ray felt a lump in his throat. He knew his daughters were hungry, yet they had still saved part of their little food for him. He accepted the bread and broke it into 3 pieces once more. "No, Dad, that's yours," Tess protested. "In a family, we share everything," he answered simply. Even hunger and hope. As they ate, Ray told stories of his childhood in a faraway place called Tennessee, where he'd seen enormous trees and swum in a river on hot days. The twins listened in awe, imagining what it would be like to dive into clean water and feel fish brushing past their toes. That afternoon, he pulled a small broken radio from his pocket. "Look what I found tossed in a park dumpster." The radio's plastic casing was cracked, and some buttons were missing. But to Ray, it was a treasure. Using his basic tools, an old screwdriver, a pair of pliers, and some bits of wire, he began working on it. The girls watched in fascination as their father's skilled hands tinkered with the radio's innards. He had always taught them about the world by showing how things worked inside, explaining that anything could have a second chance if someone cared enough to try. "Almost there," Ray muttered, connecting 2 wires. Suddenly, a soft tune filled the shack, an old melody, full of violins and a female voice singing about hope. The girls smiled, clapping their hands. "Dance with me, Dad," Tess said, extending her arms. Ray set the radio on the shelf and lifted both daughters at the same time, one on each arm. They danced around the tiny space, laughing and spinning until they were dizzy. For a moment, they forgot about hunger, the leaky roof, and their uncertain future. There was music, there was laughter, there was love. As the sun set, long shadows crept through the gaps of the shack. Ray lit 2 stubby candles, precious inches of wax that would provide light for the night. Under the faint glow, shadows flickered on the wooden wall, making Sarah's photo look almost alive. "Story time," Ray announced, settling onto the mattress with his daughters. Although not a strong reader, Ray wove wonderful tales of brave princesses who saved entire kingdoms. In his stories, the heroines always had the same names, Princess Mira and Princess Tess. That night, he told them about 2 princesses who lived in a humble castle in the forest and helped every creature they met. And one day, he concluded, something magical happened because of their generous hearts. "What happened, Dad?" asked Mira, fighting off sleep. "That," Ray smiled, "we'll find out tomorrow." As the girls fell asleep in each other's arms, Ray stayed awake, staring at the canvas roof. Another day of walking, searching, and struggling lay ahead. Another morning of promising himself he'd find a way to give his daughters the life they deserved. In the darkness, his eyes found Sarah's photo. The plastic covering caught the last glimmer of candlelight. "They're as strong as you," he whispered. "We'll make it." The candle went out, but a different light remained in those fragile walls, the stubborn light of hope that no storm could extinguish. Saturday morning brought a rare treat for Mira and Tess, a whole day with their dad at home. Ray didn't have to scour the city for broken items because he had fixed 3 radios earlier that week, selling them to a junk buyer 2 miles away. "We're having a picnic today," Ray announced while preparing what they called breakfast, some oatmeal mixed with warm water. The girls' eyes lit up at the idea. Picnic meant leaving the vacant lot, seeing people and cars and store windows, a world they hardly ever visited. "Can we take the bottle caps?" Tess asked, already running to grab their cardboard box of treasures. "Of course, Princess. And let's bring a special sandwich to share." With the money from selling the radios, Ray had bought a small luxury, a can of tuna, half a French roll, and something the girls almost never saw, a real tomato. While he assembled the sandwich with near-ceremonial care, Mira and Tess dressed in the best clothes they had, faded but clean cotton dresses saved for days like this. They put on their only shoes, sneakers whose soles were taped in place. "We're ready," they announced in unison, twirling to show off their outfits. Ray smiled, filled with both pride and a pang of sadness. His daughters found joy in the smallest things, turning a simple outing into a celebration. He wrapped the sandwich in a paper napkin and placed it in his worn backpack, along with a water bottle. "Let's go, my little explorers." They left the vacant lot through a gap in the chain-link fence where they came and went daily. The main street was only 2 blocks away, but it felt like a different universe. Tall buildings blocked part of the sky. Cars zoomed by. People walked briskly, eyes fixed on their phones or staring into the distance, as if determined not to see what was around them. For the twins, however, every detail was fascinating. They pointed at a bird perched on the traffic light, at a toy store window display, at a dog walking with a glittery leash. The world was full of colors and shapes, which their eyes drank in with the thirst of those who've lived in scarcity. Ray led them to a small patch of grass between two office buildings, landscaping some architect had planned, a reminder that nature existed before all the concrete. They sat down and began their modest picnic. "Can we play over there later?" Tess pointed to a wide sidewalk where they could lay out their bottle caps to create roads and obstacles. "Sure, just stay where I can see you," Ray replied. After drinking water and talking about the shapes of the clouds in the narrow sky between the buildings, Ray allowed the girls to play on the nearby sidewalk while he rested against a tree. Mira and Tess ran happily with their bag of colorful caps. On the wide sidewalk, they began constructing a game, lining up caps to form paths along which tiny imaginary people traveled from one world to another. "This blue cap is a lake," Mira explained to her sister, "and whoever falls in has to swim to the red cap to be safe." They were so absorbed in the game that it took them a while to notice the figure lying next to a large dumpster a few yards away. It was a man, curled up against the wall, wearing dirty, tattered clothes. His beard was tangled, and dust clung to his matted hair, obscuring parts of his face. "Look," Tess whispered, touching her sister's arm. They watched him. The strangest thing was how people passed by. Some looked away deliberately, others seemed not to see him at all, as if he were invisible or just part of the urban landscape no one cared about. A businessman in a suit walked by, talking loudly on his phone. Two women with shopping bags skirted around the man without pausing their animated conversation. A bike messenger nearly ran over him, cursing because he had to swerve. "He must be hungry," Mira said thoughtfully. The twins exchanged glances. Years of living with so little had taught them to recognize hunger in another's body and eyes. The man didn't just look dirty, he looked starved. Without speaking, they got up and went back to where their dad was resting. "Dad," Mira called, "there's a man lying over there by the dumpster." Ray sat up straight, instantly on alert. "Where?" "Right there," Tess pointed. "Nobody looks at him, but he seems really hungry." Ray studied the man from a distance. In a different life, he might have warned his daughters to stay away, to not talk to strangers. But living on society's margins had taught him that sometimes people on the street just need a moment of acknowledgement to remember they're still human. "Can we give him our sandwich?" Tess asked. Ray's heart clenched. That was their only special meal for the day. After this, they'd return to the shack where they might only have more watery oatmeal for dinner. "Are you sure? It's the only sandwich we have," he said, testing their resolve. The twins exchanged another look, that silent language only they understood. Then Mira took the wrapped sandwich from the backpack, and Tess nodded. "We're sure, Dad." Ray smiled, pride swelling in his chest. "I'll go with you." The three of them walked to the man lying on the ground. Up close, he looked even more disheartened. His half-closed eyes stared blankly. His hands, with overgrown, dirty nails, clutched a piece of cardboard against his chest. Ray squatted a respectful distance away. The girl stood slightly behind him. "Excuse me, sir," Ray said. The man turned his head slowly, as if he didn't expect anyone to speak to him. His eyes, a surprisingly clear, deep blue, looked confused. "My daughters would like to share something with you, if you'll accept it," Ray continued. Mira stepped forward, offering the sandwich wrapped in a napkin. "That's the only one we have yet, but you seem hungrier than us," she said softly. The man looked at the little bundle, then at the girl's face, as if trying to grasp something beyond his understanding. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, he stretched out his hand and took the package. His hands trembled slightly. "Thank you," he said in a hoarse voice, as if he hadn't spoken for days. Ray and the girls lingered for a moment, then stepped back to give the man privacy to eat. What they didn't know, as they returned to their grassy patch, was that beneath the grime and apparent misery was Silas Boone, one of the country's richest men. A billionaire who, having lost faith in humanity, had decided to conduct an experiment, disguising himself as a homeless man to see if genuine kindness still existed in the world. For 3 days, Silas had stayed on that sidewalk. Hundreds of people had passed him. Some tossed coins without looking. Others yelled at him to get out of the way. Most pretended he didn't exist. Until 2 little girls, clearly poor themselves, wearing taped-up shoes, offered him the only sandwich they had. Sitting against the wall, Silas unwrapped the napkin and saw the simple tuna sandwich. The smell made his stomach rumble, awakening a hunger not just physical. He looked up and saw the twins playing again with their bottle caps, while their father watched from a distance. A tear slid down his dirty cheek, leaving a clean line in the dust. It was the first time he'd cried in years, since losing his wife to cancer and withdrawing into his immense wealth and deep loneliness. From afar, Mira waved at him, a genuine smile on her small face. Silas waved back, clutching the sandwich like a treasure. In that moment, something inside him broke and pieced itself back together, something his vast fortune had never been able to buy. Faith in human kindness, found in the simple gesture of 2 children who had nothing but the essentials. Silas looked up at the sliver of sky between the buildings, the same patch of sky the girls had admired during their picnic. A decision began to form in his mind, a decision that would forever change that family's life. He bit into the sandwich slowly, savoring every bite. It was the best he'd tasted in years. The black limousine glided silently through the iron gates of the exclusive estate. Uniformed security guards saluted respectfully, betraying no surprise at the man's appearance in the back seat. They'd been briefed on Mr. Boone's experiment. Inside the vehicle, Silas looked out through tinted windows, still dressed in dirty, ragged clothes. His unshaven beard and disheveled hair clashed with the luxury leather seats. The driver, trained for absolute discretion, kept his eyes on the winding road leading up to the mansion on the hill. When the car stopped in front of the main entrance, Silas didn't wait for anyone to open the door. He stepped out alone, ignoring the marble staircase and walking around the mansion to a side entrance used only by the staff. He didn't want to sully the immaculate floors with the filth of 3 days on the streets. A tall, elegant woman waited by the back door. Maddie Lawrence, his personal assistant for 12 years, stood poised as always, her eyes revealing concern. "Welcome back, Mr. Boone," she said, holding the door open. Silas entered without replying, removing his dirty coat in the small service hallway. His shoulders, normally upright with the perfect posture demanded by the corporate world, seemed weighed down by what he'd experienced. "A bath is ready, sir. I've left clean clothes in the bathroom," Maddie said. "Thank you, Maddie." His own voice sounded different, even to himself. 3 days of barely speaking to maintain his disguise had left his throat rough. Or maybe it was the emotion caught there since those 2 girls had approached him. The staff bathroom was simple compared to the mansion's 6 main bathrooms, yet still luxurious by normal standards. Silas sank into the hot water, watching it turn dark with the dirt he'd accumulated. As the hot water soothed his aching muscles, sore from sleeping on the hard ground, memories of the last 3 days mixed with older, more painful recollections. Elizabeth, his wife, gone for 5 years after a ferocious fight with cancer. The child they never had. Friends who vanished when he withdrew from social life to care for her. Distant relatives who mysteriously reappeared after the funeral, all with tearful stories of why they needed money. For years, Silas had watched people approach him with calculated smiles and contrived niceness. Everyone wanted something: funding for startups, invitations to exclusive events, important connections, or donations to causes that curiously benefited them. His fortune, estimated in the billions, had become both his identity and his prison. Within it, he felt increasingly empty and distrustful. That was why he went to the streets, a visceral need to see if genuine kindness still existed in a world where everything seemed to have a price. After his bath, he put on the clean clothes Maddie had left, simple cotton pants and a white shirt, so unlike the immaculate suits he usually wore. He touched his now clean face, feeling the beard he planned to keep for now. In the small staff kitchen, Maddie waited with a light meal: soup, fresh bread, and tea. Silas sat at the wooden table, so different from his main dining table that could seat 20. Was the experience enlightening? Maddie asked while pouring tea. She was more than just an assistant. After all these years, she was as close to a friend as Silas had, the only one who knew his quirks, weaknesses, and the depths of his loneliness. It was humbling, he replied after a moment, and revealing. He ate a few spoonfuls of soup, the rich taste bursting in his mouth. After days of eating scraps and that little sandwich, even this simple meal felt like a feast. Do you know how many people walked by me in 3 days, Maddie? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Silas cradled the teacup, enjoying its warmth. Some threw coins, others yelled at me to move. Most pretended I was invisible. Maddie listened quietly, as she always did when he needed to talk. Then, on the 3rd day, 2 little girls walked up. His voice faltered. He swallowed hard, trying to contain the surge of emotion. They had almost nothing, Maddie. You could tell by their clothes or their taped-up shoes. Yet they gave me the only sandwich they had. Without hesitation, he set the cup down carefully, as if afraid of breaking it under the force of what he felt. My entire life, I've been surrounded by people who claim to admire me, respect me. All of them approached me wanting something. But today, someone gave me something without asking for anything in return. Maddie noticed the sparkle in his eyes, something she hadn't seen in years. Real life had returned to them. I want you to find out who those girls are, Silas said, leaning forward over the table. The ones who gave you the sandwich. Yes, twins, as far as I can tell, 5 or 6 years old. Dark hair. They were with their father, a lean young man who looked like a hard worker. I'll need more details, sir. Where exactly did this happen? Silas described the location, a sidewalk near office buildings in the western part of the city. He mentioned the father's faded uniform, probably from some maintenance or janitorial job. I want to know everything about them. Where they live, how they live, their situation. Maddie nodded, already making notes on her tablet. May I ask what you intend to do, sir? Silas rose from the table and walked to the window. Through it, he saw a portion of his manicured gardens, acres of cultivated beauty. Few besides him and the gardeners ever saw. So many empty rooms, so much wasted space. I don't know yet, Maddie, but I need to do something. He turned to face her, wearing the determined look she hadn't seen since his days revolutionizing the tech market. Those girls gave me something I thought I'd lost. Faith in human kindness, generosity without strings attached. Maddie finished her notes and stood up. I'll get on it right away, sir. We have contacts in City Hall who can help, and our security team has access to street cameras in that area. Use whatever resources you need, but discreetly. I don't want to scare them. As Maddie left to begin her investigation, Silas stayed in the small kitchen, replaying in his mind the moment the little girl held out that sandwich to him. The purity of her gesture had shattered the cynical shell formed over the years. For the first time in a long while, Silas Boone felt a new sense of purpose. He, who had everything yet felt he had nothing, had received an unexpected gift from those who had almost nothing but what truly mattered. I'll find them, he murmured to himself, watching the sunset through the tiny window, and somehow I'll repay that sandwich. Maddie Lawrence wasn't wearing her usual designer suit that morning. She had on jeans, a plain t-shirt, and sneakers, clothes she rarely got to wear in her job as the personal assistant to one of the country's richest men. Her hair was tied back in a casual ponytail, and the only accessory she carried was a well-worn leather bag holding a discreet tablet and a small camera. She parked her Honda Civic, a far cry from the Audi she used for official business, several blocks from the spot Silas had described. She preferred to walk and observe without drawing attention. Her assignment was to find the girls and their father, understand their living conditions without interfering or revealing her intentions. The neighborhood changed dramatically with each block. Gleaming office towers gave way to older buildings, then to modest homes, until Maddie reached an area where improvised shelters blended with vacant lots. The contrast was jarring, like crossing from one world to another in mere minutes. Following approximate coordinates gathered from surveillance cameras in the area, Maddie arrived at a neglected vacant lot partially enclosed by rusted chain-link fencing. From the video, they had traced Ray and the girls returning here the previous day. From a distance, using her camera's zoom lens, Maddie spotted what looked like a wooden and tarp shack, partially hidden among trees. The improvised structure barely qualified as a house. It was smaller than the main closet in Silas's mansion. Her heart ached. In 15 years of working with billionaires, Maddie had seen poverty before, in overseas trips, charity events, and news stories. But there was something unsettling about encountering it so close to home, just a few miles from the mansion where she worked. She positioned herself strategically at a corner cafe from where she could keep an eye on the lot. For 2 hours, she waited patiently, taking notes and snapping discreet photos. Then, at last, she saw movement. A thin man stepped out of the shack, pushing a makeshift wooden cart. Even from afar, Maddie recognized him from Silas's description. Ray, the father. He wore a faded shirt and stained pants, but there was dignity in his posture, and in the methodical way he arranged a few tools in his cart. Moments later, 2 small figures burst out of the shack, running. The twins, dressed in simple outfits with dark hair pulled into identical ponytails, circled around their father as he prepared to leave. Maddie zoomed in with her camera, capturing the moment, Ray bending down to hug his daughters, saying something that made them smile. There was no self-pity on those faces, just love and the typical innocence of their age. The girls waved goodbye as Ray left, pushing his cart through a gap in the fence. By instinct, Maddie followed Ray at a safe distance. She watched as he walked through streets and alleys, peering into dumpsters, visiting junk buyers, occasionally inspecting discarded items. His skilled hands quickly assessed each piece. Some he took, most he left after a brief inspection. After a few hours, she returned to her spot near the vacant lot. The girls were playing in the small area outside the shack, using stones and sticks to create imaginary worlds. Taking more photos discreetly, Maddie noticed how they laughed and took turns inventing stories, how they shared the few pieces of their makeshift games. By mid-afternoon, Ray returned. His cart now held some rusty items, a broken fan, scrap metal, a broken radio. The girls ran to meet him, examining with fascination each treasure he had found. He lifted Tess in the air, spun her around, then did the same with Mira. Maddie snapped a picture of the scene, feeling a lump in her throat. She had seen countless wealthy families over her career, fathers buying their children's affection with expensive gifts, extravagant trips, and lavish parties. But she had rarely witnessed such genuine happiness as she saw now in the midst of severe poverty. As dusk approached, she saw Ray light a small improvised cooker outside the shack. The twins helped, bringing small sticks they'd collected. With precise movements, he prepared something in a dented pot, probably the only hot meal of the day. Illuminated by the sunset and the modest fire, the 3 sat around the cooker, sharing the simple meal on plastic plates. They spoke animatedly, the girls gesturing as they told stories to their father, who listened with genuine attention, smiling and nodding. Maddie felt she was intruding on a sacred moment. She took one last photo and left, returning to her car with a heavy heart and mental images she knew she'd never forget. Back at the mansion, now night, she found Silas in the library. He wasn't in his grand office, but in an old leather armchair, the only piece he'd kept from his life before he became wealthy. His face still showed traces of fatigue from his days on the street. "What did you find out?" he asked bluntly. Maddie connected her tablet to the room's projector. On the white wall appeared the images she'd captured during the day. The shack, Ray pushing his cart, the twins playing, the family sharing a meal. "They live in a vacant lot on the west side," she explained, showing the digital map pinpointing the location. "The father, Raymond Wilson, from what I can gather, informally fixes discarded items. There's no official work record for him in the last 3 years." Silas watched silently, his eyes fixed on photos of the smiling girls despite everything. "The twins are Mira and Tess, 5 years old. They don't go to school. Probably no proper paperwork. The mother passed away 2 years ago, untreated pneumonia. Her name was Sarah. The screen showed the shack's interior captured via zoom through the small entrance opening, a tiny space where 3 people lived, ate, and slept. On one wall hung the faded photo of a young woman. "They have no running water, electricity, or basic services," Maddie continued. "But they have love," Silas finished softly. Maddie nodded, moving to the final image, the family around the small cooker, sharing their simple meal, faces lit by the last rays of the sun and the fire's glow. "What struck me most," she said carefully, "is that there's no despair in their eyes, no resentment. What I saw today was real, simple love. No performance, no plea for help, just a family fighting together, keeping their ability to smile intact." Silas rose and walked to the projected image, nearly touching the luminous faces on the wall. "In all my life," he said after a long pause, "I've never seen so much wealth in such poverty." He turned to Maddie, his eyes shining with determination. "Get everything ready. We're visiting them tomorrow." "Are you sure?" Maddie asked, surprised by his quick decision. "Wouldn't it be better to watch a few more days, plan a gradual approach?" Silas shook his head. "I've wasted too much time in my life, Maddie, observing from a distance, planning, hesitating." He pointed to the family's image. "They gave me something priceless. My turn to give back." Maddie nodded, recognizing the genuine resolve in her boss. In 12 years with him, she'd rarely seen him so determined or so alive. "How would you like to proceed?" "No extravagance, no spectacle. Just humanity," Silas said, casting one last look at the family photo. "I want to offer them something real, just like they did for me." As Maddie left to make the arrangements, Silas remained in the dim library, thinking of how his life had changed in just a few days, from a bitter, withdrawn billionaire to a man about to reach out to a family who, unknowingly, had saved his soul. The echo of his own footsteps resounded through the mansion's corridors. Silas walked slowly through the massive, empty spaces, noticing every detail as if seeing them for the first time. 80,000 square feet of absolute luxury, built over 5 years by renowned architects, furnished with pieces worth fortunes, a modern palace where he lived practically alone, save for staff who kept a respectful distance. He paused before a glass sculpture in the main hall, a unique piece made by a Japanese artist, valued at $500,000. He'd bought it at auction 3 years ago after a fierce bidding war. Back then, winning it had seemed crucial. Now it was just a cold object, incapable of filling the emptiness he felt. He continued on, passing the dining room with a walnut table that could seat 20 days, though it had never been used to capacity. In the climate-controlled wine cellar, 7,000 rare bottles waited for special occasions that never came. In his bedroom, he opened the closet that was the size of a small apartment, hundreds of suits, shirts, and shoes meticulously organized, outfits costing more than Ray would probably earn in years. Ignoring them all, he chose simple jeans and a basic white shirt, gifts from Maddie last Christmas, which she'd suggested he wear to relax, though he rarely did. While dressing, his gaze fell on a small picture frame on the bedside table, the only personal photo in the entire mansion. Elizabeth smiled from the frame, frozen in a moment of beachside happiness years before her illness. "What would you say now, Beth?" he murmured to the photo. "You always saw the way forward when I was lost." In the silence, he could almost hear his wife's voice, sensible, gentle, always reminding him what truly mattered. Elizabeth would have adored those girls. She would have recognized in them the same natural generosity she possessed. Silas left the bedroom and climbed to the mansion's rooftop terrace. From there, he could see his vast gardens, the Olympic-sized pool never used, the immaculate tennis courts. Beyond the gates, the city stretched to the horizon, a patchwork of stark contrasts between wealth and poverty. Somewhere in that view was a ragged shack of wood and tarp, where 3 people shared a love his mansion had never known. People who, through a single act of kindness, had touched something inside him he thought was dead forever. His phone vibrated. A message from Maddie. "All set as requested. We can leave whenever you say." Silas took a deep breath. The decision had been made the moment he'd seen Maddie's photos. There was nothing left to plan or postpone. Before heading down, He took one last look at the horizon. The morning sun bathed the city in a golden promise. "Maybe I can't change the whole world," he said softly, his words carried away by a gentle breeze. "But I can change the world for those who showed me compassion still exists." In the vacant lot, Ray was checking for leaks in the shack's roof. The previous night's rain had worsened a few gaps, so now he was reinforcing the blue tarp with scraps of plastic and tape. A temporary fix he knew wouldn't last long. Mira and Tess played nearby, building a new house from sticks and stones. In their fertile imaginations, the small pile of branches was a grand castle inhabited by brave princesses. "Look, Dad, I made real windows," Tess cried, pointing to small openings in the sticks. "It's beautiful, Princess," Ray said, carefully climbing down from the makeshift structure. The sound of engines shattered the quiet morning. Large vehicles were approaching. Unusual in that neglected area of town, Ray tensed automatically. Years of living on the margins taught him to fear the unexpected, which usually meant trouble. 3 shiny black SUVs drove slowly up the dirt path leading to the lot. Vehicles far too expensive for this place, with dark-tinted windows concealing whoever was inside. "Girls, come here," Ray called, placing himself protectively between his daughters and the approaching cars. Mira and Tess ran to their father, clinging to his legs, more curious than scared. They rarely received any visitors, in fact, never. The SUVs stopped a few yards from the shack, sending up a small cloud of dust that hung in the air for a moment. Silence followed, broken only by the metallic cooling of the engines. The door of the middle SUV opened. A tall, elegant woman stepped out first. She wore simple clothes, but they still stood out in the surroundings. She walked forward a few steps and stopped, maintaining a respectful distance. "Good morning," she said calmly. "My name is Maddie Lawrence. I hope we're not disturbing you." Ray didn't answer immediately, scrutinizing the situation. It didn't look like a city inspection or social services. Definitely not the police. So who could they be? "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice tense but polite. Maddie gave a gentle smile. "Actually, I believe your daughters might have met my friend recently." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "A man sitting near a dumpster. They may have shared a sandwich with him." Ray's eyes widened in recognition. The twins exchanged surprised looks, whispering to each other. At that moment, the second SUV door opened. A man stepped out slowly, tall, with neatly trimmed grey hair and a short beard. He wore simple jeans and a white shirt, clothes that looked slightly out of place on him, as if he was more accustomed to formal suits. His deep blue eyes were instantly recognized by the girls. "Dad, it's him!" Mira whispered excitedly. "The sandwich man." "But he's different," Tess observed, confused. "He's clean." The man approached slowly, stopping next to Maddie. There was a mix of nerves and resolve on his face. "Remember me?" he asked with a hesitant smile. The twins nodded in unison, still clutching their father's legs. "You ate our sandwich," Mira said. "It was the best sandwich of my life," he replied sincerely. Then, to Ray, "My name is Silas Boone. I'd like to talk with you, if that's all right." Ray's face showed shock at the name. Even living on the fringes, it was impossible not to know that name. A prominent billionaire in the tech world, occasionally appearing in magazines and newspapers. "I don't understand," he stammered, looking from the man to the luxurious SUVs to his daughters, then back to the man. "What is going on?" Silas took a deep breath. This was the pivotal moment, bridging 2 worlds that should never have met, yet were now linked by a single act of kindness. "May I come a bit closer?" he asked. Ray nodded, still confused. Silas walked forward and, to everyone's surprise, knelt in the dirt so he was at the girl's eye level. His blue eyes, now on the same plane as theirs, held genuine emotion. "3 days ago, I was doing an experiment," he began, speaking directly to the twins, though he knew Ray was listening closely. "I wanted to see if there were still good people in the world, people who help without expecting anything in return." The girls watched him in fascination. Maddie stood a few steps behind, silently observing. "I sat on that sidewalk for 3 days. Hundreds of people passed me, acting like I didn't exist." Silas's voice cracked slightly. Until you two came along, and you shared the only sandwich you had. Silas held out his hands. He didn't touch them, just kept his palms open between them in a gesture of openness and vulnerability. You gave me everything. If you'll allow me, I'd like to take care of you. His words hung in the air, laden with meaning and possibility. Silas stayed on his knees, waiting. Maddie watched, visibly moved. Why? Ray finally asked, his voice a mixture of distrust and hope. Why us? You don't even know us. Silas stood slowly, meeting Ray's eyes. Because your daughters reminded me of something I'd forgotten, he replied simply. That real generosity asks for nothing in return, and because... He paused, searching for the right words. Because you have something all my money never bought me, something real. Ray stayed silent, processing it all. His heart was torn between the natural distrust he'd developed from hardship and the raw emotion of seeing a door open when all others seemed closed. The twins looked from their father to Silas, sensing the tension, but also a new current of possibility flowing between the adults. I'm not asking you to trust me right away, Silas continued, noticing Ray's hesitation. Just give me the chance to return what your daughters did for me. No conditions, no obligations. Maddie stepped forward. If I may ask, she said softly, speaking to the twins, why did you decide to share your sandwich that day? Mira and Tess exchanged glances, as if the answer were too obvious to explain. Because he looked hungrier than us, Tess said simply. And Dad always says we should share, Mira added. Their straightforward answer made Maddie smile. There was no calculation, no ulterior motive, just the crystal-clear logic of pure kindness. Ray patted his daughter's hair protectively and proudly. He looked at the shack behind them, fragile, unsafe, but the only home he'd managed to provide since Sarah passed. What exactly are you offering? He asked, voice steadier now, taking on the role of a father who wouldn't be swayed by empty promises. Silas respected the dignity in that question. There was no pleading, just a man protecting his family. A safe place to live, education for your girls, a job for you, if you want it. And above all, he paused meaningfully, the chance to build a different future. A gentle breeze rattled the blue tarp overhead, making it snap like a flag. In that small space between the vacant lot and the luxurious cars, two worlds met, connected by the invisible thread of human compassion. Ray looked at his daughters, then at the man before him, at the uncertain future he'd always feared. Slowly, he held out his hand. My name is Raymond Wilson, he said, and these are Mira and Tess. Silas shook the offered hand, feeling the calluses, evidence of a life of hard work and constant struggle. Pleased to meet you officially, Mr. Wilson. The girls smiled, sensing something important had just happened, even if they didn't fully understand what. To them, the sandwich man had returned, now clean and different, and somehow that meant the world could still deliver good surprises. The small convoy of cars stopped in front of a two-story house on a quiet street in a middle-class neighborhood. It wasn't luxurious or ostentatious, just a regular house among others like it, with a small front yard and a young tree by the curb. Ray held one daughter's hand in each of his as he looked through the car window. Silas had explained during the drive that this would be their home for now, a phrase Ray still didn't fully comprehend. We're here, announced Maddie, opening the door so they could step out. The girls hopped out, eyes wide as they took in the cream-colored house with a red roof. For those who had lived in a ramshackle hut, this simple home might as well have been a palace. Are we going to live here, Dad? Tess whispered, almost in disbelief. Looks like it, Princess, Ray answered, still coming to terms with the drastic change in their lives. Silas approached, carrying the single bag the family owned, the few clothes and rare personal keepsakes they had brought from the shack. I hope you like it, he said with a surprising hint of nervousness. The billionaire seemed genuinely eager for their approval. It's modest, but it has everything you need for now. Later, when you're settled and we can discuss something more permanent. They walked to the door. Maddie handed Ray a small ring of keys, which he hesitated to accept. They're yours, she said gently. All the keys to the house. Ray held the cool metal in his calloused hand, feeling the symbolic weight of that simple object. Keys meant belonging, property, security, concepts that had become abstract in recent years. As he opened the door, the smell of fresh paint and new wood greeted them. The living room was cozy, with a simple but comfortable couch, a coffee table, and empty shelves on the walls. An adjacent kitchen had white cabinets, a small fridge, and a table with 4 chairs. "The fridge is stocked," Silas mentioned, "and so are the cabinets." The twins were already running around, exclaiming with excitement at each new discovery. Their bare feet thudded on the wooden floor, a sound that felt strangely right. "There's a room just for us, Mira," Tess shouted from the hallway, "with real beds." Ray followed the sound of their voices to a bedroom painted a soft shade of green. 2 small beds with new mattresses took up the space, along with a simple wardrobe and a desk. The beds were neatly made with clean sheets and soft blankets, but the rest of the room was intentionally sparse, a blank canvas waiting to be personalized. "I thought you'd like to decorate the room yourselves," Silas said, having followed them quietly. Maddie suggested kids should have space to express their personalities. The other bedroom was similarly simple, a double bed, a closet, and a dresser. For Ray, who had slept on an old mattress directly on the dirt floor, it felt like luxury. "And there's a bathroom with hot water," Mira announced, running in from the far end of the hallway. "Hand soap that smells like flowers, Dad." The bathroom was small but spotless, with white tiles and a new shower. The mirrored cabinet contained toothbrushes still in their packages, toothpaste, fresh towels, and other basic toiletries. "There's a little office space in the back," Silas added, guiding them back into the living room. "I thought it might be useful for your work, Ray, and there's a small backyard, not huge, but it's perfect," Ray said, his voice thick with emotion he tried to keep in check. "It's more than we could ever—" He couldn't finish. Silas just nodded, understanding what was left unsaid. "There are some boxes in the garage," Maddie chimed in with practical ease. "Simple furniture that still needs assembly, a few basic tools, kitchen utensils. We figured you might like to help organize the place." Ray appreciated the gesture. It wasn't mere charity, it was a chance to contribute, to keep some sense of agency amid this overwhelming change. "Thank you," he said simply. "Well," Silas checked his watch, "we'll let you settle in. Maddie or I will drop by tomorrow to see how you're doing. My number's by the phone in case of emergencies." "There's a phone too," Tess exclaimed, jumping excitedly. "And internet," Maddie added, smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. When Silas and Maddie left, the family stayed in the middle of the living room, almost afraid to touch anything, lest reality dissolve at the slightest contact. "Let's take a bath," Ray finally suggested. "A real bath, with hot water." The girls squealed with delight, racing toward the bathroom. As you went to marriage in the days that followed, the house began to feel lived in. Ray devoted himself to assembling the furniture that had arrived in boxes, shelves, small tables, lamps. His skillful hands, accustomed to fixing broken items, now shaped a home for his daughters. On the 3rd day, a small truck delivered more boxes. When opened, the girls found children's books, brand new notebooks, colored pencils, crayons, and even a few simple toys, building blocks, dolls, educational games. "Look, Dad," Mira exclaimed, holding up a picture book full of animals. "There are elephants, giraffes, and lions." Tess was already on the floor, using the new pencils in one of the notebooks, her tongue sticking out in intense concentration. Ray watched with a mixture of gratitude and slight unease. Part of him still feared this was a dream or, worse, some cruel trick. Years on the margin had taught him to be wary of unexplained kindness. Maddie stopped by daily, always punctual, always professional, yet increasingly less formal. On the 5th day, Ray caught her smiling as she watched the girls play in the yard. "They're special," he commented, walking over. "They are," Maddie agreed, letting her efficiency mask drop for a moment. "They remind me of my nieces." It was the first time Ray saw something beyond the competent assistant, a glimpse of the person behind the professional role. In the 2nd week, Silas arrived with a middle-aged woman who had a warm smile and a kind demeanor. "This is Mrs. Chen," he introduced. She's a retired teacher who agreed to give lessons to Mira and Tess a few times a week until we can get their paperwork sorted for school. Mrs. Chen quickly won the girls' hearts with her patience and creativity. She turned learning into play, adapting to each twin's pace. Mira showed a natural ease with letters, while Tess displayed a flair for drawing and numbers. Mira, the little girl spelled proudly to her dad the first time she wrote her name on paper. "Look, Dad, that's my name." Ray taped the paper to the refrigerator door like a precious trophy. That same day, Tess showed off a drawing of the family, 4 stick figures in front of a house with a red roof. When Ray asked who the 4th person was, she answered matter-of-factly, "That's Silas, of course." Ray didn't comment, but he stuck that picture on the fridge too, beside Mira's name. With the house set up and the girls occupied with their lessons, Ray began worrying about employment. He couldn't just live off Silas's charity. His dignity wouldn't allow it. During one of Maddie's visits, he mentioned his desire to work again. "What else do you know how to do besides fixing electronics?" she asked. "I can fix almost anything," he replied. "I did carpentry before everything." 2 days later, Maddie arrived in a van. Inside were some quality tools and an old damaged piece of furniture, a solid wooden desk with carved details. "One of the neighbors mentioned they needed to restore this family heirloom," Maddie explained. "I thought you could give it a shot." Ray spent 3 days working on the desk, sanding, gluing loose parts, treating the wood with the care of someone who understands its value. When finished, it looked new, the wood gleaming like only well-preserved pieces do. The neighbor was so impressed that he paid more than agreed, telling his friends about the work. Within a few weeks, Ray had a small waiting list of people wanting to restore old furniture or repair damaged pieces. The house's garage became a makeshift workshop, filled with the scent of sawdust and varnish and the sound of tools. The girls liked to watch him work, sitting safely in a corner, drawing or reading while he gave new life to items others deemed worthless. Silas visited once or twice a week, unannounced and unobtrusive. He often brought educational gifts for the girls and spoke with Ray about practical matters, documentation, a bank account, health insurance. He never once mentioned money outright and always treated Ray as an equal, not someone who owed him. On one of those visits, he found the girls in the backyard playing with a garden hose, making rainbows in the water spray. Ray was busy in the workshop, focused on a project. "Look what I can do," Mira shouted upon seeing Silas, running over to show off her newly acquired jump rope skills, a feat that filled her with pride. Not wanting to be left out, Tess brought her sketchbook to show Silas her progress in drawing. He sat on the porch step, giving them his full attention, as though nothing else mattered more. When Ray emerged from the garage and saw the scene, he paused, watching from a distance. There was something natural about how Silas interacted with his daughters. No condescension, no pretense, just genuine interest. The girls, in turn, clearly adored his presence. "Want some lemonade?" Ray offered, walking up. "The girls learned to make it yesterday. I'd love some," Silas replied. They sat together on the small porch, while the twins ran inside to get the pitcher from the fridge, eager to serve their creation. "How's work in the workshop?" Silas asked. "Surprisingly good," Ray admitted. "I have more orders than I expected. People still value well-crafted items, even in a disposable world." Silas nodded, understanding the unspoken parallel. Ray wasn't just talking about furniture. The girls came back with the lemonade, proudly pouring it into colorful plastic cups. It was too sweet, but neither man mentioned it. "It's delicious," Silas praised, making the girls beam with pride. "We made it all by ourselves," Tess explained. "Mrs. Chen taught us to read the recipe. And I squeezed the lemons," Mira added, showing her hands still tinged slightly yellow. As they chatted about their latest discoveries, ants in the yard, a pirate story Mrs. Chen had read to them, the picture they'd drawn together, Ray noticed how naturally Silas interacted with them. No impatience or artificiality. "Want to see our room, Silas?" Tess suddenly suggested. "We decorated everything." Without waiting for an answer, they pulled him by the hand, leading him indoors. Ray followed, amused by his daughter's boundless energy. The girls' room had transformed. Their colorful drawings hung on the walls, and homemade paper and string mobiles dangled from the ceiling. Each bed had a different quilt, Mira's with stars, Tess's with bright flowers. Their desk was stacked with books and notebooks in neat piles. "You did an amazing job," Silas said, genuinely impressed by the transformation. "We have a special spot for you too," Mira announced, guiding him to a little chair in the corner. "It's for when you come tell stories." Silas looked at Ray to check if he was overstepping. Ray just shrugged, smiling. "The girls insisted," he explained. "Apparently, your stories about old ships were a hit last week." Over the following weeks, a comfortable routine took hold. Mornings were for lessons with Mrs. Chen. Afternoons alternated between backyard play, reading, or helping their dad with small workshop tasks. Ray worked diligently on his orders, increasingly confident in his skills and the value of his craft. Silas's visits became a natural part of that routine. Sometimes he brought new books or educational games. Other times, he just sat on the porch with Ray, talking about work, the neighborhood, or future plans. They never spoke of the past, a tacit agreement between two men who understood the importance of looking ahead. Maddie changed too. Her rigid posture gave way to more frequent smiles. She began bringing homemade cookies baked by her mother, which the twins devoured eagerly. Once, she arrived in jeans and a t-shirt instead of her usual pristine suits, staying to help Tess complete a tricky jigsaw puzzle. One Friday night, after the twins were already in bed, Ray found Silas sitting on the porch, gazing at the stars barely visible in the city's light. "They're happy," Ray said, joining him. "Happier than I ever thought possible after Sarah died." Silas nodded, respecting the rare instance Ray mentioned his late wife. "You did that," Ray added. "You changed their lives entirely." "No," Silas corrected gently. "They changed mine first." The two men fell silent, reflecting on how a single, shared sandwich had joined two distant worlds and transformed 4 lives forever. Inside the house with the red roof, Mira and Tess slept peacefully in their soft beds, no longer fearing leaks or cold nights. On the wall between their beds, a photograph of their mother, now framed simply but beautifully, smiled over the new life they'd found. And that house, once just a building, now hummed with what truly mattered: life, hope, and the certainty of a new dawn. Spring arrived in full bloom. The small garden of the red-roofed house thrived with the flowers Mira and Tess had planted months earlier under Mrs. Chen's patient guidance. Vibrant blossoms contrasted with fresh green grass, neatly trimmed by Ray each Sunday morning. On this Saturday afternoon, the girls were at the neighborhood park with Maddie, who'd offered to take them on a picnic. Over the last few months, the once formal and distant assistant had become something like an aunt to the twins. Her once serious face now often broke into smiles, especially when Tess showed her increasingly detailed drawings or when Mira proudly read books, a growing passion. Ray took advantage of the rare solitude to work on a special project in his home workshop, an antique table belonging to an elderly client, requiring delicate restoration. His hands moved with precision over the fine wood, removing decades of neglect, revealing the beauty hidden beneath, waiting for a gentle touch. The sound of a car parking in the driveway interrupted his focus. Ray recognized the soft engine hum of the sedan Silas drove when he came alone, rather than the imposing SUVs used when traveling with security or assistance. Wiping his hands on a rag, Ray stepped out to greet him. Over the last months, Silas's visits had become part of the family's rhythm, unannounced, unceremonious, and always welcome. "Good afternoon," Silas greeted, emerging from the car with a bottle wrapped in brown paper. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Just restoring a table," Ray replied. "Nothing that can't wait." Silas glanced at the open garage, where neatly arranged tools and various projects at different stages of completion revealed Ray's flourishing small business. "Your work has a solid reputation now," Silas commented. "I heard Mrs. Miller raving about the bookshelf you fixed for her, said it looked better than new." Ray smiled, allowing himself a moment of pride. Working with wood had always been his passion, even before the troubles that forced him and his daughters into that shack. Now, with proper tools and space, His talent was thriving again. "Aren't the girls here?" Silas asked, noticing the unusual silence. "They went to the park with Maddie, picnic and a treasure hunt. They'll probably be back around dusk, full of stories and starving." "Perfect." Silas lifted the bottle. "I brought us something, a special coffee I discovered on a trip to Colombia. Thought we could give it a try." "Let's head to the back porch," Ray suggested. "I set up a little sitting area there. The garden's nice this time of year." While Ray prepared the coffee in the kitchen, he watched Silas through the window. The billionaire strolled leisurely through the small yard, pausing to examine the flowers planted by the girls, each labeled with a handmade sign indicating the name of the plant and which twin was responsible for it. He seemed contemplative, a man accustomed to grand, meticulously designed gardens, who now found genuine beauty in these modest beds tended by children. Ray carried 2 cups to the wooden table he'd built himself, simple but elegant, fashioned with patience and care, like everything he created. "Nice flower beds," Silas commented, sitting down in the offered chair. "The girls have a talent for gardening." "Tess treats the plants like characters in a story," Ray explained, pouring the coffee. "She talks to them every morning. Mira keeps a detailed growth journal, making careful notes about every change she observes." Silas grinned, appreciating how distinct the twins were, physically identical but with unique personalities he'd come to know well over the months. Different personalities, even though they look exactly alike. Sarah always said Tess was the heart and Mira the mind, but they both have mind and heart, just in different proportions. Ray rarely mentioned his late wife, but with Silas, it had become more natural over time. The rich aroma of coffee filled the air as they sipped in a comfortable silence, not awkward or tense, but the kind that settles between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. The garden offered the gentle buzz of bees visiting the flowers, and now and then a bird sang. A yellow butterfly landed briefly on the back of Silas's chair, as if inspecting him, then fluttered off among the blooms. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up," Ray confessed after a while, "to find myself back in the shack, facing the daily fight for survival." Silas watched him closely but let him speak uninterrupted. "But then I see my girls running around this house, laughing, learning new things every day." Ray looked out at the colorful garden. "And I know this is real, and that they deserve every bit of this new life." "They do," Silas agreed. "But so do you." Ray raised his eyebrows, surprised by the straightforward statement. "What impresses me most," Silas continued, swirling his cup, "isn't just what you do now, but what you did before. I've seen a lot of dads in my life, wealthy men who outsource raising their kids to nannies or boarding schools, or who vanish at the first sign of hardship." He paused to sip his coffee before going on. "You never gave up on your daughters, even with nothing. No proper roof, no guaranteed meal, no prospects. You kept them with you, teaching them to be good people." Ray looked down, uncomfortable with such direct praise. "Any father would do the same," he murmured. "No," Silas shook his head firmly. "Not everyone would. Trust me, I've seen men with far more resources abandon their responsibilities for far less." They fell silent again, each lost in his own thoughts. "I may not share their blood," Silas said at last, voice softer than usual, "but I feel like I belong to this family." The confession was simple and direct, and it struck Ray like a realization. He noticed he already saw Silas as part of them, not just a distant benefactor, but someone who genuinely cared, who showed up not out of obligation but choice. Words weren't needed. Ray just nodded, acknowledging the truth. They finished their coffee, enjoying the peaceful afternoon, the blossoming garden, and the house that had become a true home. When the cups were empty, Silas shifted in his seat, his posture indicating he had something more to say. "Ray," he began more formally, "I'd like to have an honest talk with you." "Of course," Ray said, sensing the change in atmosphere. "There's something I've been thinking about for a while." Silas hesitated, picking his words carefully. "Something important about the future." Ray waited, giving Silas the time he needed. "I don't have children, or heirs," Silas finally said. "I've spent my life surrounded by people who wanted me for my money, my influence, or what I could provide." He looked at the horizon, where the sun was beginning its slow descent. But your girls showed me something else. Purity. They gave me their only sandwich, not knowing who I was, expecting nothing in return. It was the most genuine act I've seen in decades. Ray listened intently, sensing the conversation reaching a critical point. "I'm getting older, Ray," Silas said, running a hand through his graying hair. "I've thought a lot about what will happen to all I've built when I'm gone. Who'll continue the work and safeguard the legacy?" A gentle breeze rustled the garden flowers, bringing their fragrance to the porch. "I want them to be my heirs," Silas declared, looking Ray straight in the eye. The statement hung in the air, loaded with implications. Ray felt the weight of it, the magnitude of what Silas was offering. "Silas, he began, unsure how to finish. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer," Silas said, raising a reassuring hand. "I know it's enormous. It comes with many responsibilities. Think about it. Consider what it means for you and for the girl's future." Ray took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. "It's a massive responsibility," he managed. "A fortune like yours, they're just kids." "Precisely," Silas said with a gentle smile. "They have time to learn, to grow into not just the privilege but also the responsibility. And they'd have you to guide them, to keep them grounded." Ray glanced at his own hands, hands of a laborer, scarred and calloused from years of struggle, hands that once built a fragile hut to shelter his daughters. Now, those same hands might one day help manage one of the country's largest fortunes. "I don't even know how to thank you," he finally said, voice thick with emotion. Silas reached out, placing a warm, firm hand on Ray's shoulder. "Now, they're all I have, too," he answered simply. In that moment, under a sky tinted by sunset, two vastly different lives converged on one purpose, the future of two little girls, whose simple act of kindness had proven true wealth transcends money. No more words were needed. The gentle chorus of birds returning to their nests, the fragrance of the garden, and the solidity of the house spoke of permanence, continuity, and promises unspoken, yet understood. As the first stars appeared, they heard laughter and the sound of small feet. The girls were back with Maddie, excitedly carrying trinkets from the park and brimming with stories to share. Ray and Silas rose together, as if waking from a shared dream. They exchanged a final look of mutual understanding before heading to the front of the house to meet the children who, unknowingly, had built a bridge between two worlds once deemed incompatible. And as the animated voices of the twins filled the house with life again, both Ray and Silas knew that, regardless of the details to be settled or papers to be signed, a family had been formed, not by blood, but by a conscious choice to belong to one another. Autumn had painted the neighborhood trees in bursts of red and gold. The red-roofed house looked especially cozy that Sunday afternoon, filled with the aroma of hot chocolate and cinnamon cookies. Outside, a light rain fell softly, creating a veil of water that blurred the windows and turned the world into shifting patches of color. It was one of those rare Sundays when everyone was together. Ray had postponed some carpentry work to spend the day with his daughters. Silas had cancelled out-of-town appointments to be there. Even Maddie, who usually kept weekends free to visit her elderly mother, came over for what they affectionately called a family afternoon. In the living room, Ray and Silas were engaged in a chess match that had lasted more than an hour, with Maddie quietly watching each move. Over the past few weeks, Ray had shown surprising skill. Quickly learning strategies Silas patiently taught him. "Check," Ray said, moving his rook into a threatening position. Silas leaned over the board, studying his options with the same focus he might use for multi-million-dollar negotiations. The twins, now almost 6 dangers, were seated on the soft rug nearby, surrounded by books and drawings. Their formal education had begun at last, with all paperwork sorted so they could attend the local school. Even so, Mrs. Chen still visited twice a week, now more as a mentor than a teacher. Mira was reading quietly, her finger tracing each printed word with growing confidence. Next to her, Tess was sketching, her tongue peeking out at the corner of her mouth, the telltale sign of deep concentration. "Checkmate in 3 moves, Maddie muttered, unable to resist analyzing the position. "Maddie!" Silas protested, feigning offense. "I thought you were on my side." "I'm on the side of whoever plays better," she replied with a smirk, making Ray chuckle. Silas's phone buzzed. He checked the message and frowned slightly. "Problem?" Ray asked. "Nothing urgent, just the construction company confirming tomorrow's demolition of that old building I bought downtown." "What are you going to build there?" Maddie asked, curious. Silas rarely discussed business during family time. "Haven't decided yet," he admitted, moving his king to escape the check. "I was thinking of a commercial center, but there are so many already." "Could be a school," Ray suggested, studying his next chess move. The conversation paused when Mira closed her book with a decisive gesture and joined the adults, Tess right behind. An unusual seriousness on their faces grabbed everyone's attention. "Can we say something important?" Mira asked, her small face set with determination. "Of course, Princess," Ray replied, moving away from the chessboard. "What is it?" The twins exchanged a look, just as they always did before sharing something they'd already discussed together. Mira usually took the lead, and Tess would chime in. "Yesterday at school," Mira began, "the teacher talked about kids who don't have a home. Or enough food," Tess added, clutching a drawing she'd just done, tiny stick figures under what looked like rain. "And we remembered how it used to be," Mira went on, "the shack without a real roof." Ray felt a pang in his chest. They seldom spoke of that time, though he knew they'd never fully forget it. Months in the new house had brought security and comfort, but the memories of the shack, the cold, hunger, and constant fear lingered. "Some kids still need help," Mira said, turning to Silas. "We can help them, right?" The sincerity of that request left the adults momentarily speechless. Silas gazed at the girls, so young yet so aware of others' hardships. Children who, despite living comfortably now, hadn't forgotten what it was like to go without. "How do you think we should help?" he asked gently. "We could give them food," Tess suggested, "and books, and colored pencils. And somewhere warm when it rains," Mira added, glancing at the window where rain still fell. A thoughtful silence fell over the room. Maddie exchanged a look with Silas, as though both had the same idea at once. "That building you're about to demolish," Maddie ventured, "what if instead of a mall, a foundation?" Silas concluded, nodding slowly. "Our place to help kids in need." The twins lit up with excitement. "Like a big house where we can help lots of people?" Tess asked, her eyes shining with possibility. "Exactly," Silas confirmed. "A place where children can get what they need, food, clothing, education, a safe place." "I could help with the setup," Ray offered. "Build furniture, shelves, whatever's necessary." Silas smiled, seeing how quickly this simple idea from two children was becoming real through everyone's willingness. "We could start small," Maddie suggested, practical as ever. "Renovate part of the lot for a community center, see how it goes before expanding. And the girls could be involved in planning," Ray added. After all, it was their idea. The twins exchanged enthusiastic smiles, clearly excited at the idea of helping other kids. "Then it's settled," Silas said. "Tomorrow, we'll change the plans for that property. Instead of demolishing everything, we'll remodel." The chess game was forgotten as everyone gathered around the kitchen table. Silas grabbed paper and pencils, sketching out basic ideas for the space. Maddie jotted down notes on her tablet, contact lists, required materials, legal issues. Ray offered practical suggestions, recalling firsthand what families in need truly valued. He had been in that position himself not long ago. So as in the days that followed, the idea grew and took shape. Silas assembled architects, engineers, and social workers to discuss the best ways to transform the old downtown building into a welcoming space for underprivileged children. Maddie managed everything with her usual efficiency: permits, authorizations, legalities. The building itself was a sturdy 1950s construction, 3 floors of reinforced concrete that had withstood time despite neglect. The engineers confirmed the foundation was solid. Most of the work would involve updating electrical, plumbing, and general finishes. "Let's preserve the building's original character," Silas decided after consulting the twins, who loved the large arched windows and exposed brick. Just modernize it and tailor it to our needs. Ray started visiting regularly, offering practical suggestions based on his own experience living in precarious conditions with the girls. He knew exactly what struggling families needed most: dignity, respect, and genuine opportunities for change, not just handouts. "We need fully private bathroom stalls with real doors," he told the architects. "Privacy is a luxury when you live on the edge, and hot showers, real hot showers." The girls were involved in each step. Silas always brought them floor plans and drawings to review, treating their input with the same respect he gave the hired professionals. "We need lots of windows," Mira insisted during one planning session, pointing at the architectural blueprints spread on the kitchen table. "So the sun can come in." "Our shack was always dark and sad. And a place to keep the kids' drawings and projects," Tess added, "so they can see they made something beautiful." Silas noted each suggestion, often amazed by the practical wisdom in the twins' seemingly simple ideas. They understood needs that experts often overlooked, not just physical but emotional. As remodeling progressed, the local community began to take notice. Nearby businesses donated materials. Local schools organized drives to collect books and supplies. A furniture company heard Ray was crafting pieces for the center and offered a shipment of brand new mattresses. Within 2 months and the basic structure was ready. The once abandoned building had come to life. Its exterior walls were painted in bright colors, following a design by Tess. Large windows had been installed, letting natural light flood the interior. The space had been divided into functional areas: a dining hall, classrooms, a library, exam rooms, and a spacious courtyard for play. The first floor would house immediate services: a community kitchen, a cafeteria, a reception area for donations, and basic medical rooms. On the second floor, classrooms, a library, and spaces for educational activities. The third floor, initially reserved for future expansion, was already being adapted to include small temporary apartments for families in critical need. Ray spent weeks creating the center's furniture. He closed his workshop to other clients, explaining he had a special project. He built sturdy tables and chairs for the cafeteria, perfectly sized bookshelves for the library in progress, and cabinets to store donations and supplies. Each piece was simple but crafted with the same care that marked all his work. "Why do you sand everything so thoroughly?" Silas asked one afternoon, watching Ray painstakingly apply finer and finer sandpaper to a study table. "Because I don't want any child to get a splinter," Ray replied, "and I want them to feel they deserve things made with care." While the physical structure took shape, the spirit of the foundation grew as well. The twins were at the heart of it all, guided by an unshakable sense of purpose that often surprised the adults. "We don't just want to give them stuff," Mira explained one afternoon while organizing donated books on new shelves. "We want them to feel important." "Like you and Silas made us feel," Tess said, glancing at Maddie, who was supervising the setup. Maddie smiled, touched. Becoming part of this improvised family had changed her own life in ways she never anticipated. "Let's sort the books by reading level and topic," Maddie suggested, approaching the shelf. "That way it's easier for kids to find what they need." "We can use colored stickers," Mira proposed, already devising her own classification system. Blue for adventures, green for nature, red for love stories. In the final week before opening, the foundation became everyone's main focus. Silas practically moved into a makeshift office there, coordinating donations from companies and individuals who wanted to be part of the project. Maddie handled permits, staff training, and final details. Ray concentrated on completing the furniture, working late nights with the same determination he once used, just to keep a tarp roof over his daughters. "Dad, are you tired?" Tess asked one night, finding him still in the makeshift workshop at the foundation, tools in hand despite the late hour. Ray paused, setting aside his equipment and opening his arms to her. "A little, princess, but it's a good kind of tired, different from before." "Different how?" she asked, settling onto his lap. Ray took a moment to find simple words for a complex thought. "Before, I worked out of fear of not getting food for the next day, fear of rain, fear of failing you and your sister." He gently stroked her hair. "Now, I work with hope. It's like planting a tree that will give fruit for a lot of people. The girls helped whenever they could, despite their school hours. Mira sorted and labeled donated books by age group and subject, occasionally reading stories aloud. Rehearsing, she said, for when real kids would listen. Tess prepared art kits from the donated supplies, paper pads, crayons, colored pencils, decorating each package by hand, wanting them not only to be useful but special. "I want the kids to feel that someone made this just for them," she explained, when Silas asked why she spent so much extra time personalizing each kit. Word spread about the new foundation. Local papers ran short pieces on it. Schools contacted them about field trips. Social workers asked how to refer families. Curiosity and goodwill rippled through the city. On the eve of the grand opening, with almost everything ready, Silas gathered the little family in the center's main hall. The space was now clean, organized, and waiting for its first visitors. "We're missing one important thing," he said. "We need a name." Everyone fell silent, contemplating the possibilities. Maddie had prepared a list of formal suggestions: Children's Support Center, New Paths Foundation, and so on. "We could use your last names," she offered. "Wilson Boone Foundation." The girls shook their heads, clearly not thrilled by that. "It has to be a name that shows what we do here," Mira said. "And how we want people to feel," Tess added. Ray, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "Open Hands House." Everyone turned to him, letting the words sink in. There was a poetic simplicity to the name, a clear purpose capturing exactly what they had built. "Why that name, Ray?" asked Silas, genuinely curious. Ray looked down at his own hands, working hands that had built and repaired, held his daughters through hardships, and now were creating a place for others to find help. "Hands open to give, hands open to receive, hands open to build," he said. "When you really need help, the difference between a closed fist and an open hand is everything." "What do you think?" Silas asked the girls. "Perfect," Mira said without hesitation. "That's exactly it," Tess agreed, opening her own little hands as if to illustrate. "Then Open Hands House it is," Silas declared with a pleased smile. Early the next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Ray was in his workshop. On his bench lay a fine piece of cedar, rich grain, deep color. With careful, precise tools and the expertise honed through years of practice, he carved each letter meticulously. It was a slow, painstaking process. Every curve and angle required total focus. The wood resisted, then yielded, revealing its inner beauty under Ray's patient touch. Occasionally, he reflected on the contrast between this moment and his days of frantically hammering tarps to keep the rain out, using rusty nails and tattered plastic. By the time the first rays of sun streamed through the workshop window, the sign was finished. Open Hands House emerged in elegant yet simple letters, flanked by the delicately carved outline of two open hands on either side. Ray ran his fingers over the carved letters, checking for roughness. Satisfied, he applied a coat of natural varnish to enhance the cedar's reddish tone and protect it from weathering. Later that day, with everyone gathered at the entrance of the foundation, Ray personally installed the sign over the front door, using tools he had built himself, affixing the carved cedar with the same care he gave all his creations. Silas watched quietly, struck not just by the sign's beauty, but by what this moment symbolized. Ray, once forced to improvise a leaky shack, was now using his own hands to create something lasting, a place to shelter and uplift many other families. The girls observed their father with evident pride. For them, there was no contradiction between the man who once salvaged junk for survival and the craftsman who now built something beautiful. He was the same dad, with the same capable hands and the same generous heart. When the sign was finally secured, everyone stepped back to admire the result. The carved name gleamed in the afternoon sun, like a promise made not only to the children it would serve, but to themselves as well. "Tomorrow," Silas said quietly, "we open our doors." Mira and Tess exchanged smiles, clasping each other's hands. The idea that began so simply, "Some kids still need help, we can help them, right?" was now a reality, poised to change not just their own world but many others. The day dawned bright and promising. Golden rays of sunlight danced through the trees surrounding the newly renovated building, now almost unrecognizable compared to the neglected structure of months before. Over the main entrance hung the hand-carved cedar sign, "Open Hands House," catching the morning light as though made of something more precious than wood. Ray had woken before dawn, propelled by a mix of nerves and excitement. He found the twins awake too, busily sorting through their special clothes for the big day. Simple but pretty dresses Maddie helped them pick out just for this occasion. "You excited?" he asked while he prepared a hearty breakfast. "Very," Mira said, nearly bouncing in her chair. "Will a lot of people come?" "I think so," Ray smiled. "Maddie said social workers all over the city are referring families to us." Tess, usually chattier, was quiet that morning, playing with her food. "What's wrong, Princess?" Ray asked, noticing her unusual silence. "What if they don't like us?" she whispered. "The other kids," Ray knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his larger ones. "When you offer help with an open heart, it's hard not to like you," he said. "You're giving them something precious, not just books or toys, but your time and caring. That's worth more than anything." Tess nodded, looking a bit more reassured. Dusan's refueled by 9 in the morning. They were all at the foundation. Maddie coordinated final details with a team of volunteers, college students, retired teachers, local folks wanting to help. An air of anticipation filled the halls, as if before a grand celebration. Silas arrived precisely on time, carrying a simple metal arch and a wide red ribbon. He wore understated clothes, dark pants and a white shirt, no tie. He didn't want his billionaire persona overshadowing the real purpose of the day. "For the opening ceremony," he explained, handing the arch and ribbon to 2 volunteers who set it up at the entrance. "Something simple, as you wanted." The twins watched in fascination as the arch was positioned and the red ribbon stretched across, creating a symbolic barrier between the past and future, between dream and reality. At 10 o'clock, the official opening time, a small crowd had gathered outside, mostly families. Mothers holding their children's hands, fathers carrying babies in their arms, teens looking around curiously, neighborhood seniors. Some came out of need, others out of curiosity, all drawn by the promise of hope. Ray moved close to his daughters, who stood anxiously by the entrance. "Ready?" he asked, crouching down to their eye level. The twins nodded. Each held a small pair of scissors decorated with ribbons, another thoughtful touch from Maddie. Silas stepped forward, positioning himself before the modest crowd. No podium, no microphone, no formalities, just a man speaking to those gathered. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice clear enough to carry without amplification. "Today isn't about long speeches or complicated words. It's about opening doors. Doors we hope will never again close on those who need them." He paused, glancing at the twins by his side. Open Hands House was born from a simple idea, from 2 children who once needed help themselves and decided they wanted to help others. "They taught me that true generosity comes from the heart, not the wallet, so it's only right that they be the ones to open this place." With a gesture, he invited Mira and Tess to step forward. Nervous yet determined, they approached, each holding up her scissors, aware of the curious eyes on them. "Together," Ray whispered, standing behind them. Mira and Tess raised their scissors in unison. With a synchronized snip, they cut the red ribbon, which fell gently to the ground, as if releasing more than just physical passage. Applause broke out spontaneously from the crowd. It wasn't loud or prolonged, just warm recognition of a meaningful moment, sealed by the small hands that had known both need and giving. "Welcome to Open Hands House," Silas announced, stepping aside. "Please come in and make yourselves at home." The first families entered timidly, as if venturing into unknown territory. Inside, they found a welcoming environment, walls painted in soft colors, sturdy and practical furniture arranged to encourage interaction. In the large main hall, low tables with child-sized chairs offered educational games and art supplies. Carefully labeled shelves held books sorted by age and topic, each category marked by the colored stickers Mira had devised. In one corner, a cozy area with cushions formed a reading nook where children could sit comfortably. The visitors' initial shyness soon gave way to curiosity and delight. Children, less inhibited than their parents, began exploring right away, discovering treasures lovingly prepared for them. A boy of about 4 opened one of Tess's personalized art kits, his eyes widening at the hand-drawn illustration inside. An older girl found a book about constellations on the shelves and sat in the reading nook, instantly lost in its pages. 3 younger kids discovered a box of wooden blocks, crafted by Ray, and giggled as they built a tower, shrieking when it toppled over. Mira and Tess observed everything with a mixture of nervousness and pride. Gradually, overcoming their initial stage fright, they approached other children. Mira showed one girl how to find books using her color-coded system. Tess sat on the floor with another small group, teaching them how to fold paper boats. Ray roamed the space, assisting parents in filling out forms, explaining the center's services, answering questions. Maddie guided volunteers and welcomed social workers bringing referred families. The house came alive more each minute with voices, laughter, pages turning, and game pieces clattering. Silas stayed discreetly in a corner, not wanting his presence to intimidate or build a barrier between him and those the Foundation aimed to help. From his vantage point, he took in the steady flow of people. Families leaving with information and renewed hope. Children initially shy, but now playing as though they'd known the place for years. Volunteers working earnestly. His gaze, however, kept returning to Mira and Tess. The same twin girls who, months earlier, had shared their only sandwich were now sharing something even more precious, the possibility of a better future. At some point, one volunteer started reading a story aloud, and a circle of children formed around her. Among them were Mira and Tess, seated on the floor with the others, listening intently and laughing in all the right places, part of the community they had helped create. Ray joined Silas, also watching the scene. "They look happy," he commented. "More than that," Silas replied. "They look whole." It was true. In the girls' faces was an expression deeper than mere childhood joy. There was a profound satisfaction, as if something essential had finally found its place inside them. By the end of that first morning, a particularly needy family left carrying food, clean clothes, and the promise of ongoing support. Silas saw Mira and Tess exchange a glance and smile that communicated more than words ever could. In that ordinary moment, he realized what he was witnessing. The twins who once tasted the bitterness of hunger were now experiencing something infinitely sweeter, the joy of giving. They hadn't just been rescued from their own struggles, they were now offering hope to others, completing a perfect circle of generosity, and the door that opened that day would never close again. The sun dipped slowly toward the horizon, casting golden light across the backyard of the red-roofed house. After the hectic opening day of Open Hands House, the little improvised family finally found a moment of shared calm. Seated in chairs arranged in a semicircle under a young tree, Mira, Tess, Ray, Maddie, and Silas watched the sky change color. The flowers planted by the girls months earlier wafted their gentle fragrance through the yard. There was no need for words. The silence between them felt natural, the kind that exists among people who truly belong to one another. The twins, still wearing their special dresses from the inauguration, looked tired but happy. The day had been filled with new friendships, exchanged smiles, shared stories. Their eyes shone with the satisfaction of having done something important, something beyond themselves. Ray watched his daughters with quiet pride, remembering the shack, the rainy nights, the constant fear. Seeing them now in this blooming backyard, he felt a gratitude so overwhelming it nearly hurt. Maddie had set aside her usually professional demeanor. Her hair, typically in a tight bun, now fell loose around her shoulders. Her hands, free of tablets and documents, rested calmly in her lap. Silas reached into his shirt pocket and drew out a carefully folded piece of paper, a simple drawing Tess had made months ago, showing 3 stick figures sharing a sandwich. Its childlike simplicity contrasted starkly with the significance that moment had taken on for them all. "You know," he began softly, his eyes on the drawing, "I've spent my life surrounded by people, but I never felt like I belonged anywhere." A soft breeze stirred the leaves above, as though nature itself were listening. "Thank you for letting me be part of your family," he said, looking at each person around him. No one spoke immediately. Instead of words, Ray simply reached out and placed a hand on Silas's shoulder, a gesture conveying more than any speech could. Years of distrust, fear, and loneliness dissolved in that touch. Mira smiled that radiant smile that had first touched Silas's heart through the grime and despair of his street disguise. And Tess, ever the quieter twin, stood from her chair and leaned against Silas's arm with the ease of a child who knows exactly where she belongs. "You always had a family," she said gently. "You were just waiting to find us." Her simple words hung in the air, a fundamental truth they had all discovered together these past months. That family isn't only about blood or circumstance, but about choice, presence, and the conscious desire to belong. As the first stars dotted the sky, they all headed inside. In the warm kitchen, Ray placed freshly baked bread on the table, its aroma promising comfort and continuity. Silas took up the knife and, with almost ceremonial care, cut the bread into 5 equal portions. They didn't speak of the symbolism. They didn't have to. Each knew the story binding them together had begun with a shared sandwich, forever changing everything. Around the table, their hands met in the middle. Ray's work-worn hand, the girls' small hands, Silas and Maddie's hands. For a moment, they formed a perfect circle, a tangible unity. Then, as naturally as breathing, they began to eat together, talking softly about the day just ended and the tomorrow already on the horizon. Through the open kitchen window, one could see, far off, the vacant lot where the shack once stood, now empty, but never forgotten. A reminder of how far they'd come and the importance of honoring each step of the journey. In the soft light of dusk, 5 people, brought together by the most unlikely circumstances, shared more than a loaf of bread. They shared a future. It wasn't really an ending, but a beginning. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like, because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.